Welcome to Gleaning and Gathering. This is Eric Heimlich. I'm your host today, and it's great to be back here with you again. I am thinking about the topic of hospitality today. And as we get close to Christmas, that always comes to mind, the idea of making room. And when Jesus arrived in Bethlehem, that there was no room for them in the inn. And what does it really mean for us to make room for people today? I read a great book a few years ago by Christine Pohl entitled Making Room, Recovering the Christian Art of Hospitality, and it was incredibly formational to me. One story that stuck out to me in that was a story of when she went to a homeless shelter and she was sleeping upstairs one night. It was raining outside, it was cold, and she could hear a person coughing in the courtyard. They were allowing homeless people that they could not house to stay in the courtyard. And so all night long as it was raining outside, she could hear this person coughing and was just terribly distressed about this, and woke up the next morning and was talking to the folks who run the place and said, how can you live with yourselves? How can you reconcile the fact that there are people that are sleeping outside in the cold at night when you have a house here? How can you not just, cram it full? And they said, we never accept it. It's not something that we ever get beyond. They said, but we have come to realize that at the end of the day, we can only do so much. And that it is not a sin to be finite. And that at the end of the night, sometimes we have to take in everyone that we can and close the door. And I wrestled with that concept, that thought in Indianapolis, surrounded by so much need. While we were living there, there were 9 homeless shelters within a 1-mile radius of where our congregation was meeting. On any given night, there were 3,500 homeless people on the streets of Indianapolis, some of whom were in shelters, but many who were out under the elements. And these were people that I knew by name, people that I loved dearly, and people that I was in relationship with. And every year I would take my 2 oldest daughters with me, and we would on December 21st go to the funeral for all of the people who were homeless neighbors who died in the previous year at the cathedral on the Circle in downtown Indianapolis. And many years I knew some of those names that were read, people who had passed away the previous year while being homeless. And it impacted my life. Being in relationship with people like Nick. I remember the first time I met Nick, he was standing by the exit there at Emerson Avenue, just off of I-70. And I was picking up people on Sunday morning for service and stopped. He was holding a sign, and I invited him to come and go with me. I said, we're going to have a meal after service. We'd love to have you come. It's warm, it's dry, it's a place that you'd be welcome. And he turned me down the first time, and probably the second time too. I can't remember exactly how many times I stopped, but he finally one morning came with me. And Nick not only came to our service and to our meal, but he came into our lives. And I had the opportunity to grow close to him. I preached his brother's funeral after 5 guys with baseball bats beat Jimmy to death. There was no one that they were in relationship with to preach the funeral. And so even though I had never met Jimmy, I preached his funeral. It was a terribly sad situation. But walking with Nick through all of that really began to open some doors in his heart. And it wasn't long after that I had the opportunity to lead Nick to the Lord and to baptize him. He was dying of some diseases that were a result of choices that he'd made. And even though he was just in his late 40s, he was not in good health. He ended up in a nursing home for a period of time. During that period of time, a caseworker from the Horizon House in Indianapolis, a day shelter for homeless neighbors, and I kind of worked together to find his long-lost daughter. And it was about 3 days before Nick passed away that we were able to reunite Nick and a daughter that he had not seen for over 20 years. It was a very challenging time, but I was there with Nick in those closing hours of his life, praying with him, loving him, and being there. And I'll never forget it. I remember one of the first times that I met Heidi. Adelheid Van Norman showed up at the homeless shelter where I was leading a congregation, and she began to attend the church that we had there in the Care Center gym, the homeless shelter that we met in their gymnasium, and she became part of our lives. Some of my daughter's earliest memories are of listening to Miss Heidi read them a story, and she was faithful to church every Sunday. It wasn't long after I met her that she began to show signs of Alzheimer's dementia and began to go downhill physically and mentally. It reached a point where the state stepped in and they declared her mentally unfit. And because there was no one else that she was in relationship with, I stepped up and asked to be named as her guardian. And so for the last year and a half of her life, I served as Heidi's guardian and endeavored to try to love her and walk the road with her. There was a period of time because of her condition that we had to make the decision to put Heidi in a nursing home, and it broke my heart. And we had long conversations about whether or not we should try to bring her to our home instead, but her needs were such that we didn't feel like that we could really care for her the way that she needed to be cared for. And so she went to the nursing home, but every week we would go and get her from the nursing home and bring her to service, and she would spend time at our home and then go to service in the evening, and we would return her to the nursing home. Spending time with Heidi and having her be part of our family and part of our life are memories that I cherish. When she passed away in 2009, we were able to find her daughter and get her here from North Carolina, a daughter that she hadn't seen in years. Was mentally handicapped and had a lot of challenges, but Nancy was able to be there for her mother's funeral. I'm just so thankful that God put Heidi into our lives. You know, there's a lot of opportunities for hospitality, for making room for people. And a lot of times at this time of year, we think about hospitality from the margins, people who don't have a home, people who are homeless. And certainly there's a need there, but I think that's not the only place that hospitality is needed and important. I think there's also the need for hospitality from the community of faith. And here at Victory Acres, as we have made space available to many different friends and people, guests from a variety of different backgrounds, we've had the privilege of walking the road with people coming out of homelessness, coming out of addictions, coming out of prison, various life circumstances. But we've also had the privilege of welcoming people that were just going by on the highway and broke down, and for a week while their truck is getting worked on, they bring their horses and all of their things here and stay at Victory Acres Farmhouse. And we had a wonderful time with a family that happened to a couple of years ago. We've been able to welcome lots of people that just needed a time away from the push and the race and the rush of life, and they would come here and walk the road with us and enjoy the space that God has provided for us and spend time in the prayer chapel and just be here. And that's a blessing. And I think that until you have experienced that kind of hospitality yourself, you're not quite sure what value there might be in it. But there's incredible value in that kind of hospitality. And I think that making room for people in our lives, while it is challenging and there are lots of question marks that keep people from doing that, it's been my experience that it is an incredible blessing, not just to the person that you're extending hospitality to, but to you as well. I do think there is a sense in which we have to be aware that when we are making room for others, that it is challenging, not just for us, but for them as well. And so treating people like guests is sometimes harder than if we allow them to just figure things out for themselves and take care of things rather than trying to host them in a way that makes them feel on edge. I think about this in relation to people living with us long term. In one of the early Christian classics, the Didache, there were rules that were put in place for anyone who was staying with someone else. Of course, in early Christianity, hospitality was not an industry like it is today, where you can just rent a hotel somewhere. There were places that you could rent, obviously, but it wasn't nearly to the degree that we have it today. And so many times people would stay with other people along their way. But in the Didache, it limited that to 3 days. That after 3 days, you are no longer just a guest, that there needs to be a new arrangement. And I think that's true, at least it's been my experience that it's true, in making room for people in a longer term sort of way. It may not be comfortable, but in order for there to be a long-term relationship that does not turn sour, there needs to be expectations that are defined. Because when people come to us, they come with expectations. And when they come, we also have expectations of how they will and won't act. Our expectation may be they're not going to get into our refrigerator and, just raid it for the leftover roast beef that's in there. They're not going to just help themselves to whatever they like out of our pantry and decide what it is that they're going to have for supper or for breakfast. Our expectation is that they're a guest. They're in our home. This isn't theirs. It doesn't belong to them. And so that does provide some challenges. If you're going to do this in a longer sort of way, there does need to be definition to that so that people are not feeling like they're constantly living on edge and wondering, have I done enough? Most of our married life, we have had people living with us from outside of our immediate family, and it's been a great blessing. But it has also been something that has led me to recognize that we have to define this. My wife is Southern, and she grew up in a very Southern family. I think I was like one of the second Northerners to marry into her family, and that is a big deal because there is a culture of the North and a culture of the South, and part of that is that, there are these things that Southerners say that are not necessarily clearly defined. They understand what they're saying. And so when they say, you come by anytime now, you hear, they mean that in the way that another Southerner would understand that. And that is that, you come by and please be respectful of my time. Let me know before you do and make sure that it's going to be something that, is good for both of us. As a Northerner, I want to have things very clear, out in the open, not dealing with nuance. I feel like good fences make for good neighbors. And so a few years ago, my wife's sister, Christy, came to live with us, and she was coming out of some challenging circumstances at the time. She had recently become a Christian, and she was moving in with us when my second daughter, I think, was just barely born. And so this has been, almost 20 years ago. After a few days, I felt like that there was a real need for us to sit down and have an in-depth conversation about what is the expectation here and how can we define this. I wanted her to feel free to get into the refrigerator and get food. She's paying her way. She's doing her part. She's doing enough. She doesn't have to feel badly about using the resources of our household. This is her house. But in order for her to be a part of this house, she has to understand our household economy. So in our household, I don't get up each morning and say to my wife, hey, how much is breakfast going to be today? And she says, well, I don't know. It depends. How much is the oil change going to cost? We don't do that in our house. I change the oil in our cars. Many times she cooks breakfast for me. And while that is you could say a monetary contribution to the economy of our family, we don't monetize that. We don't put a dollar value on it and, make exchanges inside of our family in that way. We just do things for each other. So there are some things that we do because we live here. But there are other things that as we do them, they add value to our home. So when I do change the oil in our car, instead of taking it to Jiffy Lube, I'm contributing to the economy of our home by doing that. And when she cuts my hair, as she has our entire married life, she's saving us, I think it's $27 is what the average haircut is now. So we're saving money, and in saving that money, we are contributing together to the economy, to the overall economy of this home. And so when we add someone else to that economy, when we add someone else to our household, it's helpful to bring them into that picture for them to understand this is what it takes. And so we sat down and just ran through the numbers and said, this is what's going to take for heat and for lights and for all the rest. And so here's the picture. This is the slice of the pie that would be yours. And so we understand that you may or may not be able to pay that in dollars and cents, but there are things around here that we could ask you to do that we would put a value on, and then your contribution to the economy of the home could be valued in that way. And again, not just things that we're doing because we live here, but things that we're asking you to do, things above and beyond that. It wasn't too long after that she got an outside job, and for her, she had more money than time at that point, so she contributed to the economy of the home by putting in her share of that to the family economy. And so we defined, this is the area that's yours. This is your personal space. And so if you close this door, this is yours. This is your area. We're not going to disturb you. If you want to be out here, this is the common area. And so if you're wanting to fellowship and be part of our family in an active way, this is where you do that. So we defined those things. We sat down, we talked those things through, and it was an amazing arrangement and a beautiful thing. For the next, I think, year and a half to 2 years, she was able to save money instead of having her own place. She was able to get a car. She was able to begin to make progress towards goals that she had because she was part of a family economy, and we were able to extend hospitality in a way that was helpful to her, but it also didn't hurt us at all. Actually was a huge blessing to have someone that was there that could be a babysitter for us sometimes when Rochelle and I would go out on Friday nights, and that would be a part of our family in just a very encouraging and rich sort of way. But when you're welcoming people in, there's an economy of the home, but there's also just the overall life of the home. And so there are times when there are challenges, and there are things that have to be discussed and have to be dealt with, and children that have to be disciplined, and all kinds of other things. And so when you're part of the family, you see all of that. And so there's a stress that comes into that for some people, especially if you're a private person and you're like, I don't want people to see our business. And yet, if they're living with you, they're going to see your business because that's just part of it if you're going to be sharing life and having hospitality at that level. And so it's something that I think can be incredibly beneficial because it does challenge you as a family to think about things differently when there are others that are included in your home. And I think that for us, having people in our home and walking the road with people from a variety of different backgrounds, that really shaped us and helped to create a culture within our family that we are a family given to hospitality. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2, that's one of the characteristics, or at least some people would call requirements of a bishop, is that he be given to making room, be given to hospitality. And I think that it is a challenge to us today. There is a hospitality industry, but I think one of the really underutilized opportunities for Christians to have a marketplace witness is in the area of Airbnb. Whether it's, you've got an extra room that you could rent out, or whether you've got a little cabin on your property, or whether you've got a whole nother house, to be able to make it available to people in a way that would extend hospitality to them is a tremendous opportunity in this day and age. Increasingly people are not coming to church. I'm talking about people that have never been to church, have very strong opinions about organized religion in general. The statistics tell us that over 30% of Americans have never been to church one time and don't plan on going. They have very strong opinions about it. And even though they are not going to church, they're still open to hearing from an individual about their faith journey. In fact, the same group of people, when asked, over 80% of them said that they would be open to hearing from an individual about their faith journey. And so I think that an opportunity is there for Christians to be able to extend hospitality, and in doing that, as we welcome people, for them to smell the aroma, if you will, of a Christian life, of a Christian family, to see people who love Jesus and that there's something different here, and that we're able in little ways and sometimes in bigger ways to be able to open a door that otherwise would never be opened, and be able to extend the gospel to people that might never hear it otherwise. They're not going to walk into a church, but they would rent your Airbnb, and in doing that, you would have an opportunity to interact with them. And again, I'm not talking about pushing the gospel down their throat and being obnoxious. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about just using hospitality as a tool to hit people upside the head. I'm talking about extending the kind of Christian hospitality that would cause people to ask questions and want to know more. Ask and want to know the truth behind your way of living. And so I think there is an opportunity there to be able to do that in a way that, again, extends a helping hand to those that are not wanting to pay $120 to stay in a hotel. So you've got a space that's available to them that's less than that, but you're doing more than that. You're also bringing them into your life and allowing them to see Christianity up close and personal. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And while I know not everybody has the space to do that, I think that all of us can endeavor to make room. Another thing that's been in my mind are the many, many refugees that are coming out of places like Ukraine. People that are fleeing war, people that have had to leave behind their homes, their friends, their family. And as I was corresponding with a friend of mine who was a translator for me on my last trip to Ukraine in 2015, she and her little girl right now are in the process of making their way to the United States, and on a long and arduous journey, unfortunately having to leave behind her husband who cannot leave the country. It breaks my heart. And I know them. I've been in their home and been part of their lives, and they've extended their hospitality to me. I slept on an air mattress in their little apartment in Kyiv. And so right now there's a tremendous need and opportunity for us to extend the gospel and hospitality to those who are in need, that are coming to us from war-torn places, not out of choices of their own, but because these choices have been thrust upon them. And I'm reminded of what it says there in Hebrews chapter 13. Let brotherly love continue. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Many times we don't realize the full impact that we're having in making room to others, and may never understand it until we get to heaven, because making room, and making room not just in our personal space, but in our life for people, can have a tremendous impact on them. I haven't read the book yet, but my daughter recently read the book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key by Rosaria Butterfield, and I recommend it, even though I haven't read it. Kaylin is a good critic of books, and she said it's an amazing book. But the story there of a young lady involved in a lesbian relationship who ends up encountering a Christian couple, and that they welcome her into their lives, and in a very winsome sort of way begin to just love her to Jesus. And they do that not with judgment, but with kindness. And ultimately, she comes to faith in Christ and is still on that journey, leading other people to faith in Christ as well. It's an exciting example to me of how hospitality can make an eternal difference. And so I just want to encourage you during this Christmas season to look at your life. I understand that not everybody can just, take in people off the street and do hospitality from the margins. Believe me, there are plenty of stories that I could tell you, including stories of stolen vehicles and all kinds of things that have gone wrong as we have endeavored to extend hospitality to those who were not following Jesus and who took advantage of our kindness and put us in danger at times. And I've learned some lessons from that. I've hopefully become a wiser person than I used to be, but I do not want to ever lose my heart for people, because while there have been difficulties along that journey, the wonderful bright spots, the people that we have known, and the kinds of relationships that we have shared far outshine any difficulties that we have had along the journey of making room and extending hospitality to others. I am so thankful that we have had the opportunity for making space and welcoming people. And I know what a tremendous blessing that it can be. And so I want to encourage you at this Christmas season to make room for others, because in doing that, we are making room for Jesus. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 25 to his disciples, he said, "I was a stranger and you took me in." Those are powerful words. When you think that when someone comes to us unknown, there's all these fears that are natural in us. What if? And sometimes those fears are valid. And yet, when strangers come to us, Jesus is coming to us. We have the opportunity to serve him. And as he said, "I was a stranger and you took me in." I just want to remind you at this Christmas time to see people through his eyes and to make room in your life. I believe that God wants to use Christian hospitality to see people brought to himself. And so just want to encourage you to at least consider that and how God would help you, not only in this Christmas season, but in your life, to make room for gleaning and gathering. God bless.